had never seen my mother take off her wedding ring. Until one winter night when the entire house was swallowed by darkness. I was only 11 years old at the time, and my mother, Maggie, was still the strongest woman in my small world. She did sewing work for other people, cooked, patched our clothes, and kept the three of us warm through the bone-chilling winters of Ohio. And on her left hand, there was always that worn-down gold ring, as if it had been there since the day she was born. I was sitting in the old kitchen holding a cup of cold coffee, watching the snow fall outside the window. The house was unusually silent, with only the ticking of the wall clock and the sound of my own heartbeat echoing through a December morning. While cleaning out the kitchen drawer, I came across an old electric bill. The ink already smudged the paper, turning yellow. And just like that, I could almost hear the door creak open, the sound of her fastening her coat, then her footsteps slowly fading into the cold snow. Each of us has a memory, not loud, not dramatic, but whenever it resurfaces, it squeezes our hearts just a little. For me, it is the memory of a night without lights, without heat, but with my mother, quietly parting with the most precious thing she had, to bring light back to her children. If a memory just popped into your mind, even if it is just a tiny detail, share it in the comments. Who knows, maybe someone else out there is remembering the same way you are. And if this story touched something in your heart, do not forget to subscribe to the channel so that memories never fall asleep and there will always be someone to listen with you. That night when the lights went out, I was too young to understand what was happening. But now let me tell you how that winter truly began. That night outside, a thick blanket of snow had piled up almost to the bottom edge of the window, enough to make anyone stop and feel like time itself had frozen. The winter wind howled, carrying the sharp scent of snow, and the cold slipped through every crack in the old wooden doors, making its way into our small kitchen, where the whole family sat gathered around a worn-out wooden table. It was the same place where we had dinner every day, where simple meals happened without much notice. But that night, something in the air felt different. Dinner began like any other night, with bowls of steaming soup, slices of bread soaked in a little olive oil, and the faint crackle of the radio from the living room playing a familiar tune. The scent of onions, sweet potatoes, and aged wood from the table blended into a kind of peaceful aroma. But then out of nowhere, the ceiling light flickered and suddenly went out, as if someone had held their breath in the middle of a sentence. Everything was swallowed in thick darkness, leaving only the faint clink of spoons against bowls and the cold rushing in like a wave trying to swallow up the last bit of fragile warmth. My mother, Maggie, stumbled slightly. Her spoon clinked softly against the edge of her bowl before she quickly lit the candle that had been placed on the shelf. The weak flame slowly brightened the room, casting a flickering golden light onto her forehead, revealing deep-set wrinkles, the marks of long years of hard work and quiet sacrifice. She set the candle in the middle of the table. Her voice rang out calmly, soft like the steam rising from the soup bowl. It is probably just a little issue with the power system. Her words sounded gentle, meant to comfort us, but her eyes said something else. A truth too heavy to hide. This was more than just a sudden power failure. The candlelight reflected onto my father's face. That man who always seemed so tough suddenly lowered his head. His hand rested gently on the piece of paper still lying on the table. The electricity bill. The amount on it was not outrageous for many other families, but for us, living off Dad's miner's wages and Mom's small sewing income, it was a burden. Tom, my older brother, who was 14, tried to keep a calm face, but I noticed the tight line at the corner of his mouth, the flicker of tension in his eyes. Billy, our youngest sibling, huddled inside his sweater and whispered, "I feel cold." That small voice echoed in the candle-lit room like a sudden blast, stopping everyone in their tracks. I looked at my mother. She gently adjusted the shawl on her shoulders. Her hands were trembling, but her lips still held a smile, as if by keeping that smile alive, she could hold the house together. The food slowly cooled. I took a few more spoonfuls of soup, tasting the mild sharpness of the onions, the faint hint of olive oil mixed with the scent of old wood. I did not fully understand the meaning of a power outage. I only knew that without electricity there was no peace, no light, the kind of light that was already so rare during the long winter. Mother quietly stood up and began clearing the dishes. Her hands trembled, but she did not complain, not a single word. In the dim shadows, a question rose inside me. Why didn't Mom tell Dad earlier? Why didn't she pay the bill in time? But I swallowed it, because I was afraid that asking would touch a pain too deep for anyone to name. A little while later, she returned and said softly, as if she was trying to steady herself, "Tomorrow I will sew more, take on extra work. Hopefully it will be enough to cover the bill." That sentence sent a chill through me. Not because of the wind outside, but because each word carried a weight she was trying so hard to hide. She said nothing about selling anything valuable, nothing about loss. She only spoke of sewing and patching, as if convincing herself that her hands and her time would be enough. The candle still flickered its light, catching strands of gray in her hair. She leaned over to wipe the table as patiently as if she were wiping the worry from her children's eyes. Tom suddenly stood up and quietly helped her pack away the food. Billy moved into the corner of the kitchen, fumbling with a water bottle, his small hands clumsy. The bottle hit the floor. Water trickled, and the sound of his shaky breath filled the kitchen. All of it blended into one fragile rhythm, the rhythm of a family trying to hold on to warmth in the freezing dark. Dad sat there in silence. He placed the bill back on the table and looked at Mom. In the flickering candlelight, I saw a glimmer in her eyes, part pride, part tenderness. He said nothing. He just gently raised his hand and touched hers. It was not a tight grip. It was support, companionship. In that moment, I felt they made a silent promise, one that we, their children, would remember for the rest of our lives. After dinner, we went upstairs. I lay in bed listening to the sound of Mom pulling blankets over Tom and Billy. Those hands, though thinner now, still carried enough strength to make us feel safe. No one mentioned the power bill. No one talked about the missing wedding ring. But something inside me tightened. I understood that Mom had given everything she had to keep this house feeling like home, even in darkness, still glowing with another kind of light. I closed my eyes, listening to the wind slip through the cracks in the door, mixing with the dim light that still lingered from the candle. In my mind, that image became a fragile but shimmering, stained glass painting. A small candle, Mom's trembling hands, and our whole family sitting together. That night, I did not cry. But deep inside, I felt the greatest kind of love. Not loud, not wrapped in fancy promises, but a quiet sacrifice, enough to keep the warmth from fading. That night I grew up a little more, and something carved itself into my heart: always honor quiet sacrifices because they are the pillars that hold up a home. But that was only the beginning, because after that dark night came a stretch of days filled with lacking, not just lacking electricity, but lacking things I would only later come to understand were truly valuable. After that power outage, life in our house did not exactly shut down, but it felt like a slow, lingering fever. There were no more warm nights under the light. Instead, there were evenings spent sitting together listening to the candle flicker and our stomachs growl in waves. I began to realize that what had been cut off was not just electricity, it was a part of the peace I had thought would always be there in childhood. My father lost his job in January that year. The quarry where he worked shut down due to bankruptcy. He came home with a small wooden box filled with his personal tools and a pair of worn leather gloves he had always used when cutting stone. He did not say much, just left the box under the table and sat down beside Mom. She did not ask anything. She simply handed him a cup of black coffee, cold and bitter, then bent over her sewing machine in silence. From that day on, Mom began sewing from morning to night. She mended pants for laborers, patched shirts for neighbors, made tablecloths for the church. Her sewing machine clattered almost non-stop. Some nights, its sound was the only thing in the house louder than the howling wind outside the windows. I would often sit in the kitchen corner doing homework by an oil lamp, listening to the fabric slide through her hands, the needle piercing layer after layer, as if it were stitching through my heart. I never knew when she slept, only that every morning I would find her already awake, carefully running her fingers down the back seam of a shirt, her eyes puffy but full of quiet resolve. Back then, our kitchen was cold enough to see her breath. Every morning, mist rose from our mouths inside the house. The heater was only turned on when absolutely necessary, and absolutely necessary in Mom's dictionary meant when Billy had a bad cough or my fingers were too numb to write. On the stove sat an old cast iron pot. Most days it held potatoes, beans, or thin broth made from leftover chicken bones. Mom always added a little salt, a few stalks of celery, not much, just enough to give the food some taste to make the poor meal feel less like hardship, while Mom, so Dad, often sat quietly listening to the radio. That old radio was the most treasured item in our house, not just because it connected us to the world, but because it was the only voice breaking the long silence of our days. I remember clearly the news reports about wars, protests, oil crises, rising prices. Whenever there was a live broadcast from the battlefield, Dad would sigh and turn it off. He did not want Mom to hear the helicopters, the bombs. He would say, "We already have enough battlefields at home." I grew up during those lean months. Used books, hand-me-down clothes from Tom, which I kept clean so Billy could wear them after me. I had only one pair of school shoes for the entire winter, worn at the heel, patched inside, but still the thing I cherished most. On snowy mornings, Mom would line the inside of my shoes with brown paper bags to keep my feet dry. She would say, "Just to keep your toes warm, sweetie." I felt a little embarrassed, but I also understood. That was how she turned not enough into just enough. Tom was 3 years older than me, but when things got tough, he somehow became a grown-up overnight. He started taking odd jobs, shoveling snow, delivering newspapers, sometimes helping out at the mechanic shop in town. He did not talk much, but I knew he always saved the best part of his meal for Billy. Once I caught him hiding a pack of cookies in his bag, and later that afternoon I saw him slip it into Billy's hand. I asked why he did not just eat it himself. He smiled and said, "Little ones need sweetness more." I still remember those quiet nights when the flickering candlelight gently reached into every corner, casting faint shadows on the wall. The room was just bright enough to make out each person's shape. Me, Tom, Billy, all sitting quietly around the old wooden table, bracing ourselves against the cold and silence. That light was not enough to chase away the chill, but it was enough to soothe the soul. One night dinner was only a small piece of bread. Mom cut it into 4 equal parts, but she did not take a piece for herself. I naively asked, "Why are you not having your share, Mom?" She just shook her head gently, her voice soft as morning mist. "I am not hungry," but the way she looked at Billy as he took his first bite, I saw something powerful in her eyes, a mix of relief and quiet heartbreak, as if she had just handed over the last bit of comfort to the smallest one to keep him safe from the cold. I did not fully understand it at the time. I only knew there was a lump in my throat, something bigger than hunger sitting there between us. It was sacrifice. It was the mother who quietly gave up her share so her children could go first. It was the father, a man of few words, who woke up before dawn to chop firewood for neighbors in exchange for a bag of rice. It was Tom, my older brother, who tossed aside pride and scraped his fingers raw, doing whatever work he could just to keep this world steady for his little brother. Those days felt endless, like a winter that would never end. Some afternoons, snow fell hesitantly outside the window, cold enough that you could hear your own breath and feel everything stand still. But the smallest details carried the most warmth. The clatter of the old sewing machine in the kitchen, the radio's static voice reporting faraway wars, the smell of roasted sweet potatoes in the air, and most of all, the quietest words from my mother, "I am not hungry." That simple sentence, so light and yet so powerful, etched in me a definition of love, not grand, just timely, just enough to warm the heart. And then, in the middle of those cold days and simple meals, I began to dream of something that seemed so small, a Christmas night with electricity, with light, and with a real bit of magic. I do not remember exactly when I first started thinking about it. Maybe it was on a foggy afternoon while Mom was mending clothes for a customer and I was drawing a Christmas tree with charcoal on an old piece of food wrapping paper. Or maybe it was the moment I looked out the window and saw the Christmas lights twinkling from the house across the street, glowing vibrant like magic, while our home had only candlelight and white breath that looked like smoke. But one thing I know for sure that year, my one and only wish was not for toys or a new bicycle, but simply for the power to come back on. Just electricity. That was all. I did not ask for much. Just to be able to turn on the heater so Christmas Eve would not feel so cold. Maybe we could watch the holiday special on our black and white television. The same one we used to watch every night before we fell behind on the electric bill. I longed to hear the opening music of a Charlie Brown Christmas, to see Snoopy's goofy face rolling in the snow again. I remember clearly the way the screen's glow used to light up Mom's face while she sewed. A soft kind of light that no candle could ever match. Tom understood.
He was the first one to say, "Why don't we make our own Christmas lights?" At first it sounded ridiculous, but in that long, freezing winter, a little bit of ridiculous was what kept kids like us feeling alive. We rummaged through the old drawers and found a few rusty batteries, some short copper wires, and one tiny bulb from a broken flashlight. I remember Tom sitting for hours, twisting wires, scraping off corrosion-connecting terminals with bits of tin. I knew nothing about electricity, but I believed in him. His hands looked like those of a scientist rebuilding the world. Billy used candy wrappers to cover the bulb, so it will look more like a Christmas light, he said, excited. When Tom finished connecting everything and fitted in the batteries, we all held our breath. The bulb flickered once, then went out, then glowed again. Just a little. Billy clapped. I laughed. Mom looked over from the sewing table and smiled softly. She did not say a word, but I knew she was hoping too, hoping that belief could fill in the empty spaces where money and comfort were missing. During those last days of December, we hung that light in the window, just one bulb held up by tape and wrapped in candy paper blinking in and out. But to me, it was the most beautiful Christmas tree we ever had. Every time it flickered, I felt like my heart lit up a little too. Billy made an extra tree out of cardboard cut from an old cereal box Mom had not thrown out yet. He glued on snowflakes made from cotton swabs and used a bottle cap as the star. As for me, I sat down and wrote a letter to Santa Claus, not to be mailed, just folded up and tucked under my pillow. In the letter, I asked for nothing but one working power outlet. Dear Santa, if we have electricity again, I promise to be good all next year. I do not need toys, just electricity, please. One evening, Mom brought home a few sweet potatoes and a tiny jar of cinnamon. She said, "We will roast these on Christmas Eve. Make the house smell like dessert." Her words stung my eyes, not out of sadness, but because I knew she had walked nearly 2 miles or about 3 kilometers just to trade for those things. That night I saw her standing by the window for a long time, her silhouette reflected in the glass glowing with the faint light of our homemade bulb. That image has never left me. A small woman, strong enough to hold everything together. Christmas Eve came. The cold was sharp and biting. The heater still did not work, but the house smelled of roasted sweet potatoes, and cinnamon and laughter echoed from 3 kids snuggled together under one wool blanket. We played gift-guessing games even though we knew there would be no gifts. Tom pretended to give me a movie ticket to watch Snoopy, and Billy tucked a dried pine twig wrapped in sewing thread into Mom's hand. I remember sometime near midnight, after everyone had fallen asleep, I was still awake. I stared at that tiny bulb. It no longer glowed, the batteries were dead. But in my heart, the light remained. Because I knew, even without lights, without presents, without the holiday special, I still had family. I had a mother who had given up too much to keep 3 kids warm. I had an older brother who carried more than a boy his age ever should. I had a little brother who kept finding ways to make things adorable even when he had nothing. And that night I silently thought to myself, I wish Santa would bring us a working outlet instead of a sleigh. But just when I thought Christmas had ended with the candle flickering out, something happened. Quiet, unexpected. That changed forever the way I saw my mother. After Christmas, the cold still gripped the town. The snow was not any thicker, but the wind was sharper. My fingers cracked from holding pencils, and every morning felt like a real battle, just to get out from under the frozen blanket. I still thought of that flickering Christmas light we had built together, but it was just a quiet memory.
The batteries had died. The light was gone. Everything returned to normal, which meant it was still quiet, still cold, still lacking. But something small caught my attention. Mom no longer hummed softly in the kitchen. That evening after dinner, Mom quietly reached for the old coat behind the door. She brought nothing, no bag, no gloves, not even her usual sewing tote. She wrapped a wool scarf around her head and headed out. Dad asked, "Where are you going? It is freezing." She simply replied, "Downtown," picking up some sewing work, and closed the door behind her. The creak of the hinge echoed like a held breath. I stood by the window watching her fade into the fog, but she did not head toward the fabric shop like always. Instead, she turned down Main Street, where the pawn shop sat, under tired yellow street lights. I could not be sure, but something in me, that quiet instinct of a child, knew something was different. An hour later, she returned. Her hands were empty. No bag, no fabric, nothing. She brushed snow from her shoulders, took off the scarf, and sat down in the kitchen like she had never left. She did not look back. I watched her for a long time. 3 days later, there was no notice, no warning, no knock. Just one cold night, while Mom was mending a winter coat, hands shaking as she threaded the needle, the light above us flickered on, warm and golden, like sunlight, breaking into the night. The room froze in silence. Then the light spread, pushing the fear away with it. Tom shouted, "The power's back," full of disbelief and joy. Billy jumped up and turned on the radio. Music came through, soft and bright like a voice, reminding us we were no longer in the dark. I stayed in the corner, eyes fixed on Mom. She did not smile. She blinked slowly and kept sewing. Her hands trembled not from cold, but from release. It was the kind of shaking that happens when you finally let go of something you have carried for too long, the warmth, the home, the family. 2 days later, on a quiet Saturday morning, I sat on the porch, scribbling in an old notebook. I was not drawing anything. I was listening to the wind, slipping through the cracks, boots, crunching snow, and finally Mrs. Henderson's soft steps coming closer. She handed Mom a bag of fabric scraps. I watched them sit on the steps, chatting like it was spring. I did not hear the whole conversation. "Just one part. Did you ever find your ring?" Mrs. Henderson asked gently. Mom paused. She stopped stitching the thread hanging loose. The wind carried the scent of snow. After a moment long and silent, she finally said, almost whispering, "I did not look. As long as the kids were warm on Christmas Eve, that is all that matters." Her words flickered like a small flame, not bright but warm enough to light something inside me. I did not turn around. I was afraid to see the cost in her eyes. But I understood. The ring did not matter anymore. Her sacrifice was not about a thing to be found or replaced. It was something deeper, part of her youth, part of her love, quietly given and never asked back. That night I opened the small drawer where she kept the most precious things. The ring box was still there, empty. The velvet inside still bore the dent where the ring used to sit, like a scar pressed into my heart. No one said a word, no one asked. But from that day forward, I understood that she had given up a part of herself just to give us a little warmth, a little light in that long winter. And from that day on, I began to see her differently, not just as the woman hunched over the sewing machine, not just as the one who woke up early to cook breakfast and warm the milk, but as someone brave enough to let go of something she had carried all her life. For 3 children who were not yet old enough to understand that sometimes love does not need words. I thought everything would end there. Until one day I opened the familiar drawer and realized that my mother's wedding ring, something I thought would always be there, was gone. I don't think I would have noticed if that afternoon I hadn't randomly opened the wooden drawer under Mom's sewing table. It was the same old drawer spools of thread scraps of fabric and the deep red velvet box I remembered so well. It had once felt like treasure. I used to see Mom open it on special days, gently wipe the ring, then slip it on her finger like a quiet ritual, a vow she never needed to speak. But that day, when I opened the lid, it was empty. Empty in a way that made the air colder. The little dent where the ring had rested was still there, like a ghost of a memory that hadn't let go. I froze for a moment, my heart sinking, as if I had dropped something precious. Afternoon sunlight streamed through the curtain, casting golden threads across the floor. The only sound was the click of the sewing needle. I looked up and saw Mom by the window mending Billy's torn coat. My voice came out soft, barely a whisper. "Mom, where's your wedding ring?" She didn't answer right away. Her hands kept folding the fabric, gently smoothing it across her lap before replying, eyes still fixed on her work. "Maybe I dropped it. I'll look later." It was a simple answer, light as wind, but it caught in my chest. I glanced at her ring finger. It was bare. I had never seen it empty before. It looked more delicate now, as if something had been quietly taken from her. I wanted to ask more, but I didn't, because her face didn't show sadness or anger, only silence, the kind you live with after accepting loss long ago. I turned away, but that empty velvet box stayed with me. In the days after, she worked harder than ever. The sewing machine's light rarely turned off glowing, even past midnight. One night I woke up at 2 a.m., cracked my door open, and saw the dim kitchen light still on. I heard the hum of the sewing machine steady, like the heartbeat of our home. Her silhouette sat quietly at the table shoulders, moving with each pedal press. Her face looked tired but peaceful, like someone who had embraced a truth in silence, pouring herself into every single stitch. I brought it up with Tom. He looked surprised and gave me a look like I just asked something silly. Maybe she put it somewhere else. Don't overthink it. But I saw it. The uncertainty in his eyes not matching his words. He turned away quickly, avoiding my gaze. We never brought it up again, but the three of us felt it. Something was missing. Not just the ring, but the quiet reassurance that always seemed to come from Mom's hands. One afternoon, while I was helping Mom stack fabric on the wooden shelf, the velvet box appeared again. Still there, still silent, still empty. This time Mom caught me staring. She did not hide it nor explain. She sat down, let out a sigh so soft I would have missed it if I had not been paying attention. Then she said, almost like talking to herself, "There are things you do not need to hold in your hand, child. It is enough to hold them in your heart." I did not answer. I just looked down and quietly folded the worn fabric scraps. But that sentence echoed in my heart again and again, like a whisper that refused to fade. That night I sat alone on the porch. The sky was full of stars, and the cold wind curled around me, the scent of damp wood mixed with the chill that seeped into my coat. I closed my eyes and suddenly remembered what Mom had once whispered to our neighbor, Mrs. Henderson. "As long as the kids are not cold on Christmas Eve, that is all that matters." Suddenly everything clicked.
I understood Mom had not lost the ring. She had let it go. Quietly, without complaint, simply out of love. To her, the ring was no longer the keeper of a vow. That vow had become action, sleepless nights. At the sewing machine, deep footprints. In the snow, warm meals on the table. And I knew her love did not need a tiny band of metal to prove its existence. From that moment on, whenever I looked at her bare hand, I no longer saw something missing. I saw strength. I saw love. That hand could mend torn coats, carry invisible burdens, and sacrifice, quietly, without anyone noticing. The memory of that empty velvet box no longer haunted me. It became a symbol of love that does not need form, only presence. But then one evening when snow blanketed the porch and the wind howled through the cracks, I saw Mom quietly put on her coat and step outside. And this time I decided to quietly follow her. That night, the snow fell thick, like fragments of emotion breaking apart in the air. The yellow streetlight spilled through the window, casting soft shadows of snowflakes on the glass, flickering like little lanterns, dancing on the cracked wall, forming shadows that felt like memories refusing to stay still. I tilted my head, and through the foggy glass I saw Mom. She stood motionless on the snowy porch, pulling on her old sweater. No gloves, no scarf. The streetlight glowed against her graying hair, turning her silhouette into something both warm and lonely, etched into the winter night. I do not know what instinct moved me, but I jumped up, shivering in my thin coat, and stepped outside. I did not call her. I did not ask. Just the small sound of my footsteps crunching through the thick snow, each step a soft crack. No words. Just uneven breathing in the freezing wind and the sound of falling snow, like glass beads shattering on the earth. The cold seeped through every layer, straight to my bones. But I did not turn back, because in that endless white night I knew my mother's presence was the only flame I had. I kept my distance, hiding behind a street lamp as she paused in front of the old pawn shop. Its windows were dusty, its glow inside dim like a dying ember. My heart pounded. I had never followed her here, never seen her enter the place kids in our neighborhood called the House of Lost Things. The wooden door creaked. A soft bell rang like a church bell on Christmas Eve. I held my breath, fingers pressed against the cold pole. Through the foggy glass, I saw her speak to the shopkeeper, an old man with silver hair and drooping glasses. They barely spoke, just a few nods, then something small was placed on the counter, hidden from my view. I could not see what it was, but I felt it a silent trade paid in quiet sacrifice, not money. She turned and stepped back into the cold, unaware that small eyes were watching. Her shadow stretched long across the snow, fragile but steady. I stood still. Something in me cracked open, not a sound, but a knowing. My mother wasn't just someone who sewed, cooked, and cared. She carried the whole winter on her back, giving up what she loved most to keep us warm. Walking home, I stepped into her footprints. Her steps were deep and sure. Mine were small, unsure, trying to follow. I remembered being little, walking behind her on the village road before I knew what bills were, or what a wedding ring meant, or what a pawn shop did. Now I was still a child trying to walk in those same steps. Only now I understood the weight they carried. When she reached the porch, I stayed at the edge of the yard. I watched until the kitchen light flicked on. She hung up her coat, brushed snow from her hair, and returned to the sewing machine. Her fingers were dry and thin. Her ring finger bare glowed with a light no electricity could ever create. There was a flame in her, steady and silent, lighting up our kitchen. That light, I knew, then had never gone out. Back in my room, I sat at my desk, pretending to do homework. My pencil scratched the page, but I could not write. All I saw was her alone, but unshaken beneath the street lamp, her deep steps in the snow, and the soft chime of that doorbell, the quiet truth of that night. I told no one. I kept it to myself.
Some truths are meant to be held in silence so they can live forever in the heart. From that night on, I carried one truth I would never forget. Love does not always take a visible shape. It does not need a wedding ring or grand promises. Sometimes love is just a figure in the dark footsteps in the snow, a quiet sacrifice witnessed only by an 11-year-old boy who would carry it with him for the rest of his life. I never told my mother I followed her that night, but when the lights came back on and the family gathered around the table, I looked at her, and for the first time I saw that light came not only from the bulb above. When the kitchen door closed and the cold was shut out, warmth began to spread through the little room. The wind outside still howled through the cracks, but in here, under the soft yellow light above the dining table, a quiet peace returned. The glass lamp on the ceiling glowed, not just from the restored electricity, but from the simple presence of family in a moment we thought we had lost. I sat between Tom and Billy, the two of them wrapped in thin wool blankets, and noticed their shoulders seemed less tense, as if the warmth in the kitchen had finally let their bodies breathe, let them set down a burden too heavy to name. Mom placed a bowl of hot soup on the table. Steam rose carrying the scent of onion and sweet potato, a smell simple yet deeply comforting. It was not just the scent of food. It was the smell of memory of Christmases past, of humble dinners that still managed to bring everyone together. Mom glanced out the window where fog had covered the glass. Outside, the snow lay like a white carpet, so still it made the heart ache. In her eyes, I caught a gentle kind of sorrow, a pain that only those who suffer quietly ever know. It was not bitterness, not regret, just a quiet, tender kind of endurance, proof of love that is soft but unbreakable. Dad turned to her, looked for a moment, then said nothing. He simply placed an extra piece of roasted sweet potato into her bowl. The gesture seemed ordinary at first, but his eyes resting briefly on her face spoke more than any words. I saw a flicker of awkwardness in him as he looked down at his plate, but that small, clumsy moment with eyes glistening in the golden light etched itself deep into my memory. It was not loud, not dramatic, but it made my heart tremble with the simple truth: love does not need to be grand. Sometimes a single look is enough to shine bright. No one mentioned the stack of unpaid bills on the table. No one brought up the ring that had been sold. All of that loss seemed to fade under the warmth of dinner, under Mom's eyes that now looked at her children, not at her empty finger. The kitchen, though small and worn, was filled with presents, and in that moment I felt clearly that love could fill every material gap, could turn fragile space into true peace. The soft sound of spoons tapping bowls of bread crust, breaking into soup, it all blended into the background like music. I took a deep breath. That smell brought back a flood of memories. Christmas winters with a candle on the table, the clatter of the sewing machine, the quiet laughter in the long night. All of it came back painting a simple family portrait in my mind. I wanted to say thank you. I wanted to say I was happy. But I stayed silent. Because sometimes silence is the best way to protect a moment, to keep it whole, unbroken by sound. That tiny kitchen became a stage where every act was lit by wordless love. The golden light fell on an old photo hanging on the wall, a wedding photo of my parents where the diamond ring once sparkled. The ring was gone now, but the photo remained, proving that the most precious things are never made of gold. The lesson that dinner taught me was simple. Real light does not come from a jewel or a switch. It comes from love, nurtured over years, quiet but steady like a candle burning through a winter night. After dinner, as the family cleaned up, I watched Mom carefully dry each spoon. Her cracked hands moved slowly, as if preserving the light we had just reignited in that kitchen. The way she folded the dishcloth, placed it neatly, smoothed out every crease. It felt like she was putting together the pieces of memory, stitching them into a soft quilt to cover and protect this family. Dad sat quietly at the table holding a cup of hot tea. He did not ask, did not probe, did not investigate. But in that silence, I realized he understood everything. Sometimes silence is the language of empathy. And in that moment, it made Mom smile gently, a smile as light as mist brushing past the window, but enough to chase away the chill. Tom unexpectedly poured more tea into Dad's cup, a rare gesture from a brother who was usually rough around the edges. Billy sat, curled up by the heater, holding his worn-out teddy bear, his eyes slowly closing in the warmth that had filled the room. I looked around and saw us, 5 people in a small kitchen, having just weathered a storm without needing to say a word. Our presence alone made that moment sacred. The ceiling light still flickered the power line, unsteady. But every time it dimmed, I felt something flare up inside. A quiet flame that burned warmer with each blink. No one spoke, but I was sure we all felt the same, that meal was unforgettable, not because of what we ate, but because we were still sitting there together, sharing warmth after the storm had passed. Mom wiped her hands with a towel, then looked up at the 3 of us. "Tomorrow I will make apple pie," she said softly, her voice as clear as spring air. A simple sentence, yet it brought me a sweet hope. Like a ripe apple, sowing the seed of a new season in my heart. I understood that in saying that Mom was shifting our worries into something gentler, a pie, a smell, a tomorrow. That night as I lay in bed, the memory of dinner stayed perfectly intact inside me. I realized then that light does not always return in a sudden blaze. Sometimes it comes back quietly through the smallest things, a bowl of hot soup, a roasted sweet potato, a hand reaching out for another. And sometimes we do not need to call it a miracle. We just need to be still enough to recognize it happening right where we sit, in the heart of our kitchen where love lives. The lights came back, but the ring did not. And in all the years that followed, my mother's ring finger still carried that empty space, as if that memory had never left. I once planned to spend my very first paycheck on buying back the ring, but then I understood some sacrifices cannot be undone. Time, like the snow on the rooftop, melted slowly, quietly, but leaving its mark on the soul. Our family had found its way back to a steady rhythm. Dad got a job at the local paint company,
more stable with a regular paycheck. Mom still sat by the sewing machine even though she no longer had to work late into the night, but she kept the habit, as if her hands needed the thread to keep part of her soul intact. A new oil heater was installed that spring, once the snow had melted. I remember that moment clearly. All of us gathered in the living room, our fingers warming slowly in its gentle heat. It was nothing like the flickering flame of a candle. I sat between Tom and Billy watching Dad read the newspaper with a relaxed face, and Mom knitting a scarf for me, her ring finger still bare, but never lacking love. In my early 20s, when I received my first paycheck from a part-time job at the library, the thought of Mom's old wedding ring flashed through my mind. A spark of an idea: I will use this paycheck to buy Mom a new ring. I imagined the night she had taken it off, wiping away silent tears in the dark. The ring was no longer on her hand, and I wanted so badly to return that clear, innocent memory to her. But the moment I stood at the entrance of the pawn shop, I stopped. And right there, I understood. Happiness does not live in objects. It lives in the invisible things we give. I chose not to buy a new ring. Instead, I helped Mom choose a thick wool blanket, something to keep her warm through cold nights. I hung a soft yellow lamp in her room, a light not wired to electricity but to the woman who had given me warmth. Every time I saw her curled up beneath that blanket, I felt her love more clearly than any ring could ever show. In my final year of high school, I came home one cold winter evening. Mom welcomed me with a hot bowl of soup, her hands still knitting. I looked at her bare ring finger, then looked at her, and for the first time I understood that the absence of the ring did not change the essence of the one who wore it. She still wrapped warmth around the family. Her eyes still held softness that never faded. I once asked her about the ring. She simply smiled and said, "It is somewhere else now, sweetheart. No need to ask further." I knew what she meant. Love may travel far, but it never leaves. Years passed. I went to college, then started working. Life widened. Some Christmases I came home. No car rides through glowing neighborhoods, no flashing lights. Just quiet evenings beside the old sewing machine. The needles click, telling stories of the night we lost power and how Mom gave up her ring to bring back the light. Every time I heard that story again, my chest ached, but in a warm way, like a gentle fire. A reminder that love endures longer than metal, shines brighter than electricity. I once planned to spend my first paycheck. Those words came from the heart, but now I did not need to spend money to bring memories back. I just needed to be present with her, to hold her hand and let the silence speak what no object ever could. There is a silence only family can share, the kind that brings us home to where it all began, where the ring never returned, but the love never left. Time passes as quickly as the sunlight fades in late afternoon. Mom grew older, and the hands that once held my childhood now tremble, and the ring never came back. She turned 90 in the quiet softness of winter. Snow fell thick outside the porch, so white it was hard to tell where the roof ended and the sky began. In the small room bathed in golden light from the table lamp, she sat still in her worn-out armchair. She was still knitting, each stitch slow like she was weaving memories back into her life. I sat beside her watching her hands. They were no longer strong, thin and fragile like dry branches quivering in the breeze. But every time she reached out and held mine, I felt like that little child again, sheltered, warmed by a nameless kind of love. Her old wedding ring had long been gone,
Her ring finger had been bare for years, but that empty space never made her seem incomplete. On the contrary, it became something sacred, a quiet space where words were not needed yet. Everyone understood. There had once been a vow, a sacrifice, a love big enough to warm even the coldest winter. I remember my own wedding day. Mom was the first to take Linda, my wife, by the hand and say, "You do not need a ring. You just need to love each other deeply." I was young and did not think much of it. But now, with the years giving me more understanding, I know that sentence was the truest, deepest blessing of all. Not showy, just sincere. Every Saturday afternoon I visit her. She does not speak much, just invites me to sit beside her, pours a cup of hot tea, and returns to knitting or flipping through old photo albums. The photos are faded, the pages yellowed, but when her hand touches them, the memories light up like it was only yesterday. Sometimes she tells stories from long ago, about the kitchen with flickering candlelight, about the patched coat I used to hate but now miss dearly. She never mentions the ring, not because she forgot, but because she never needed to. To her, love was never about possessions. It was about how we remember it, how we keep it alive through our actions. One afternoon while I was helping her fold the finished scarves, she gently held my hand and said softly, "You are grown now. You understand, don't you?" I did not speak. I only nodded. That moment, simple yet profound, was like a shared nod between two people who had made it through that long winter and understood each other to the very core. She is still alive, still sitting there with bare hands, still the place I come home to after all the chaos of life. And every time I see those hands, unadorned, no longer strong, I see my childhood in them. I see all the old winters and a kind of light that never fades. I always thought that ring had disappeared forever, until one day as I stepped into a small thrift store on the street, I saw something tiny glimmering behind the foggy glass, like the gaze of a memory. One autumn afternoon, as the golden light of day gently settled over the streets, I wandered into a small second-hand shop at the corner, a place where warm yellow bulbs reflected off the dusty air of time. The store displayed old clocks, cracked ceramic plates, and countless keepsakes from past lives. In a quiet corner between tangled necklaces and faded watches, I saw a simple gold ring, strangely familiar, almost identical to the wedding ring my mother used to wear when I was little. I picked it up, my hand trembling. I was not sure if it truly belonged to my mother, or if it was simply a relic from someone else's story. But looking at that tiny golden circle, I could suddenly see my mother's slender fingers again from that winter night when the power went out. Something inside me whispered, this might not be the real ring, but it carries the memory I have never forgotten. I handed it to the shop owner. He paused for a moment, then raised an eyebrow and said, "Old piece, very cheap." I closed my eyes, took a soft breath, and gave him the money. As the ring slipped onto my finger, I felt a quiet warmth, like I had touched something that carried love without needing words. That evening, under the gentle kitchen light, I quietly stepped into her room. Mom was already asleep, her silver hair resting across the pillow, her breathing slow and even. I gently lifted her hand and slipped the ring onto her bare ring finger. It might not have been the original, but to me it was my way of giving back a piece of memory, like relighting a small flame after years of winter wind. The next morning, as sunlight streamed through the curtains, I saw her stir. Her hand paused at the ring, slowly brushed over it, and her lips curled into a soft, peaceful smile. No words were spoken, but I understood what she had received was not just a piece of jewelry, but the quiet presence of love continuing on. Maybe that ring was not the same wedding ring from back then, but to me it became a symbol that true love does not live in metal, nor does it need a physical shape. It lives in the moments we still choose to sit together quietly, holding hands and walking side by side all the way to the end. The ring came back, but the memories did not. That winter, Mom started calling me by the wrong name, as if the years inside her were gently slipping away little by little. That December arrived without noise, soft and slow like a gentle symphony. Snow blanketed the rooftops, and every small movement of the day sank into thick, white silence. Mom, now frail and thin, stared blankly, as if she had forgotten where she was. She still sat by the window, the one that used to be the center of all things warm and loving. But now she asked, "Do we still have electricity, sweetheart?" Her voice was distant, as if asking about something that once existed, but had faded into fog. I smiled and gently held her hand. "It is always bright here, Mom." The soft yellow light from the ceiling flickered above us like my heart trying to hold on to a source of light, even as darkness slowly crept in. It was not just about electricity. It was about the certainty, the safety I still wanted to give her. Mom began forgetting the little things. One morning, she mistook a cup for a spoon, stared into the reflection inside it, then softly asked, "Did you bring me some water?" I only nodded with a smile. That small gesture carried the quiet rhythm of a lifetime we had already lived. I began noticing the details. She still remembered the faded floral curtains, the silence of the sewing machine behind the family photo, the scent of apple pie she used to bake each Christmas. All of it came back to her like small dots, connecting a fading map of memory. One evening I told her the story again, about the ring I had gently placed back on her finger while she slept. Her thin, trembling brows lifted, and she softly asked, "You found that little circle, right?" The word circle fell from her lips, so fragile as if afraid it would break midair. But it struck me deep in the heart. I quietly wrapped my arm around her shoulder, patting her like a child. "Yes, the ring is still here, Mom." In that moment, I felt like the little boy I used to be, and she, even in her frailty, was still the only place I could lean on. Time continued passing silently, but no longer with the noise of youth. It moved through the room with each quiet breath, each ticking second on the clock, each cold wind slipping through the cracks of the window. On snowy evenings, I would sit beside her again, her cold, bony hand tucked inside mine. Between fading breaths, she whispered, "You are my light." Those short words carried a weight I had never truly felt until then. In the quiet of that room, a different kind of light appeared. The one she'd carried all her life, needing no electricity, no flame, only the warmth of love. Mom did not forget everything, but her memories were now scattered like pieces of broken glass. Sometimes she remembered that winter, the candle on the table, the little ring, the quiet laughter. Sometimes everything became like smoke, vanishing the moment she tried to grasp it. But in the rare moments when she recognized me, her eyes lit up, sparkling as if trying to hold on to me completely. And I realized the greatest form of love does not depend on remembering the entire past. It lies in the moments we are still here, looking into each other's eyes with familiarity, even when memories blur, and even when the hand no longer wears a ring. In that small room, I no longer felt the need to speak grand words or do anything big. To answer her love, I only needed to sit beside her, letting my warmth flow into her cold hands. I only needed my presence to fill the gaps in her fading memory. That was enough. Enough to warm any winter, no matter how deep the snow. Enough to keep the light from her heart and from mine glowing endlessly. The last winter passed, but within me, the light stayed. Not from electric bulbs, but from my mother's hands, from a love with no name that continues to flicker quietly in my soul. Years after those dark nights, without electricity, after the flickering light from the ring I found, and the quiet glow my mother kept alive, even as her memory faded, I returned to the old house. The afternoon sun stretched out like a soft, musical note falling through the window, catching the tiny specks of dust dancing in the air. I walked slowly through the living room. The fireplace had been replaced, but the old teapot on the table still carried the faint scent of dried tea leaves. That room was once the heart of our family, where we gathered when the power finally came back. That night I had gently placed the ring on my mother's finger, under the silence of the night. All of it now rests in the past, thick with memory in my heart. Today the lights are controlled by smart switches. The world outside is filled with modern devices that my childhood could never have imagined. But inside me, the light that truly matters has never come from wires, bulbs, or screens. It came from the moments when Mom smiled as she taught me to knit a scarf, from the gentle tap on my head before bed, from the warmth of a meal under candlelight, and later under electric light, and above all from a love that never needed words. I took off the ring and placed it into a small wooden box, not to preserve it, not to hold on to a physical memory. I simply let it be, because the light I feared losing did not come from any object. It came from a mother's heart that lit a fire in mine that still burns today. On a peaceful afternoon, I stepped out onto the porch where the old, moldy snow had quietly melted under the touch of spring sunshine. I thought back to that first power outage many years ago when I was just 11 years old, the first time I truly understood what it meant to go without and what it meant to give. Now I see it clearly that night there was no electricity, but there was Mom, and that alone was more than enough. Endings do not come in bold letters. Endings come in a whisper. Jack was raised not by wealth, not by machines, but by a silent love, by a cold winter, by a missing ring, and by the light my mother gave a kind of warmth no modern invention could ever match. And so decades have passed since that winter, the winter of candlelight, of the missing ring, and of a mother who quietly lit up my childhood, not with grand gestures, but with unconditional love. If you have ever held onto a memory that made your heart ache, a hand you once held, a glance that stayed with you, or a small moment you have never forgotten, share it in the comments. Who knows, somewhere out there someone might be remembering too. And if this story warmed your heart, consider following the channel so that every week we can open up another piece of the past together, where light does not come from electricity but from the little things that never stop glowing.